Hey everybody, what's going on? Hellmite here, bringing you another video from Grab the Lantern today. Today I wanted to talk about mobility versus immobility and kind of how that plays out in game and what mobility champions oftentimes give up in exchange for their mobility. The mobility discussion has kind of come back up with the reveal of the Akali rework. A lot of people are understandably very concerned about the amount of mobility that they perceive she has in her kit and are trying to say, well, how is this fair? This shouldn't really be a thing. It seems like that's way too good for a champion to have. Why even bother playing melee champions or immobile champions when things like new Akali exist? And I don't think it's an entirely fair I guess assumption to make about Akali in the first place. I do kind of feel like at the end of the day, Akali's mobility isn't as good as you would think it is, and I think that there are a lot of there's a lot of things that you give up in order to have that level of mobility. First, let's take a look at Akali herself. Now, Akali has a fair amount of mobility. I'm not going to lie, she does have a decent chunk, but if you really look at what she has, it's all fairly gated. First and foremost, she has a very long targeted dash, but in order to get that, she has to land an ability first in the same vein as Lee Sin. So yes, Lee Sin is very mobile because he does have the Q, he has the W to jump himself around when he doesn't have a valid enemy target to jump to, or he can sort of Q2 jungle monsters, but it's that level of mobility, and I wouldn't say that's necessarily egregious, especially given that Akali E has a 16-second cooldown on it, which to me feels as though you're not going to have that very often in fights. It's going to be sort of a twice a fight, maybe 3 times a fight if it's a very long-running fight ability. So it doesn't feel to me that that's super egregious mobility. And then if you look at her ultimate, which now has a 120-second cooldown, scaling down to 80 seconds with no CDR, that's a very long time to be waiting on your free targeted dashes. Besides those two abilities, Akali has no other mobility outside of a minor movement speed bonus while she's within her Twilight Shroud. That's it. That's it for her mobility. This so-called unavoidable, so much mobility, that's really all Akali has. Now, she does have some other movement speed bonuses as a result of her passive whenever she passes through the ring. There are some other things she can do in order to give herself mobility, but it's far from a ton of mobility or even an unfair amount of mobility as a lot of other players are kind of saying, and why play immobile champions, because Akali doesn't have that much when you really look at what level of mobility she actually does have. Now, I kind of want to transition from that to talking about mobile champions versus immobile champions and sort of how this is bounced around. Now, yes, it does feel pretty bad when you play an immobile champion, someone who at most has a lot of movement speed and at worst has literally nothing they can do to run away from an enemy champion or to close the gap on an enemy champion. That can feel pretty bad when you're someone who's getting kited, who doesn't have anything they could do to either shake the Callista or to chase the Zed or the Pike or these kinds of things. It does feel kind of bad. But at the end of the day, champions that are immobile generally have other advantages that sort of make up for the fact that they don't have mobility. And I'm not trying to devalue mobility. There's a reason that champions with mobility tend to be very popular in professional play and high level play, tend to be very mechanically demanding, tend to have higher skill ceilings than other champions, and it's because mobility is a powerful tool. I'm not trying to say that it's totally worthless and it doesn't actually mean that much. But what I do want to get at is that mobility isn't the be-all end-all that everyone makes it out to be. And I think that there are other reasons to choose other champions. For example, if we look at Sion is what I would consider to be an immobile champion. He does have the engage ultimate with his ult, but he doesn't have, it's not that reliable, and even at close range, yeah, you can point blank ult somebody, but the knockup is very short, the stun afterwards is very short, you're not likely to get a lot out of it, the damage isn't very high, so it doesn't give you that much, and especially if you're trying to use it at even moderate ranges, it's very likely that the enemy champion just dodges out of the way because it's a very telegraphed ability, and at most you might get the AoE damage from canceling your ult early or from hitting a wall near them. It's difficult to land that. So Sion is someone I would consider to be an immobile champion. And Sion, sure, he doesn't have dashes, he doesn't have blinks, he doesn't have usually any way of getting on top of the target, but what he does have is a lot of damage and a lot of crowd control and a lot of area of effect crowd control, which is partially why Sion is so effective as a tank. and that he can start a fight, and he's very scary to deal with. He's not the kind of champion you can just ignore in a fight, because if he's in your midst, he's smashing everybody with Qs, he's getting multiple champions in that, he's getting the AoE damage from the W procs, because if you're not focusing him, he's getting that damage for free, he doesn't need the shield. He has the E slow on priority target that also shreds armor, so he has the ability to help his allies deal more damage to that target. A Scion that is sort of able to get there does a lot of damage, and you have to be scared of him. So if you don't have mobility, you generally have significantly higher damage, higher utility, something along those lines. Yeah, assassins have mobility, but that's kind of their shtick. That's sort of their thing, is they're sort of allowed to be the champions that have very high ability to pick fights they want, to disengage or re-engage as they see fit. That's their whole shtick. But to sort of compensate, they don't have the ability to do sustained amounts of damage, and they tend to be very cooldown dependent. A Zed, who just uses abilities on a wave, is an easy target to trade with, because what does he have left to fight you with? Pretty much nothing, because he just used his abilities, and he doesn't have any sustained damage outside of that. So assassins are sort of reliant on having this level of mobility, and that's kind of why Akali is allowed to have what she has. And again, it's very heavily gated on Akali. Her ultimate is not a very low cooldown ability like it was before. It's 80 seconds at maximum rank. Obviously, that's before you start factoring in CDR, but even with CDR, you're only getting it down to, and I'm terrible at math, so this might be wrong, 45 to 50 second cooldown on her ultimate. And that's if she goes straight CDR and she's able to get 40 to 45% CDR. That's not necessarily the easiest thing to do, nor is it necessarily what Akali wants to do, and that would be basically Akali saying, I want to have as many dashes as possible, opting into having lots of mobility as opposed to opting into damage as she might otherwise do. So it's sort of fine, and I don't necessarily see why it's a problem, especially when you look at old Akali, for example, who had 3 targeted dashes to bring her on top of you, and a free targeted blink with her W. She didn't have to use that just for the stealth, as Akali can currently do. Instead, she could use that to just straight up close the gap, and this is before even factoring in flash. So it is the sort of case where Akali actually has slightly less mobility than she did before, but it's also healthier mobility that doesn't rely on Akali literally pressing buttons to kill you. So, but anyways, those are just kind of my opinions on mobility and on Akali more specifically, and why it's totally fine and why I don't think it's that big of a deal for Akali to have what she has. But go ahead and let me know what you guys are thinking of mobility in general, and also Akali's particular situation down in the comment section below. Would love to hear your thoughts. If you enjoyed the video, go ahead and leave a like. And if you really enjoyed the video, consider subscribing. I upload a video every Monday, Friday, and on patch days as well. And if you're looking for more Grab the Lantern content, you can check out my blog, link down in the description. I upload an article just about each and every single day for your enjoyment. Once again, thank you guys so very much for watching. I do appreciate it. And I'll talk to you all later.